Good morning, welcome.
Thank you.
But I'm going to start talking about the first bridge in front of us. This is the Michigan Avenue DuSable Bridge from 1920 by Edward Bennett. And it's a trunnion bascule bridge, which is a double seesaw. There's a crack in the middle here, big concrete weight underground on either side. We want to open these bridges. Guys go into these bridge houses, these buildings on the corners. They turn on an engine, push the concrete weight onto the seesaw and the bridge box engine. Absolute disaster for the traffic. This is called Blacker Drive. And Blacker Drive curves off to the left here. The main stem of the Chicago River that we're on right now, which goes from the lakefront to the fork, is about 1.25 miles long, about 2 kilometers, amazingly straight, except for right here where it does this S-curve off to the left. If you follow that curve off to the left and down to the end, you'll see another tan-colored neo-classic building with a huge temple on the top. This building from 1926 by Yaver and Nickelberg is known as the Jewelers Building, or 35 East Blacker. For that building, between 1920 and 1933, you could not legally sell an alcoholic beverage in this country. It was the time of Prohibition. Doesn't mean we didn't have bars in Chicago. We did. They were called speakeasies. And what was in the temple at the top of that building? It was called the Stratosphere Lounge. It's now a corporate conference room. The larger lower part of the building has smaller temples on the corners. Those smaller temples used to have water towers underneath them. Before the advent of sprinkler systems, buildings used to have water towers on the roof in case of fire. You needed a lot of water readily available. Now you notice there's not water towers under those little temples now, and that's because the building's been retrofitted to the sprinkler system. I want to take your attention to the right side of the boat and head into the next block, and just starting to come into our view is the edge of a black painted steel and glass rectangular building from 1971, now known as AMA Plaza, designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, the father of modernism. This is mid-century modernism, what we were doing in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. These black painted steel and glass rectangles, no applied decoration on the outside. In fact, the metal here is painted black on purpose because it's the least decorative color. A modernist thought the beauty of the building was not in the decoration, but rather in the structure. And unfortunately, when we come out front of this bridge and we look at this building on the right, we cannot see what the modernists are trying to show us because we're too low down here on river level. This building is pushed up on a pedestal. The first floor is enshrouded in glass and recessed. So if we were up there on street level, we could see columns on the outside and throughout the building. Again, the structure, that was the beauty of the building to a modernist. And we can't see that here on the right, but we will see a lot of other modern buildings later in the cruise and we can see that, so hang on to that. We had a negative reactionist style on the right in the 1980s and 90s. That's the period we call postmodernism. And our first postmodern buildings coming up ahead on the left in the next block, the taller of the two buildings, the gray building, is the Leo Burnett building from 1989 by Roche Bakery. Kevin Roche, the lead designer of that building, was a Pritzker Prize-winning architect. The Pritzker Prize is sort of like the Nobel Prize for architecture. Well, what makes this building postmodern? Well, first of all, it has color. Now, albeit it is gray and not black, but there are various shades of gray red on the outside. It's also not completely regular across the facade like the modern building I showed you. There are parts of it that are recessed in, jut out. The building, and you'll see there's a colonnade there. Very different than the modern building. And you can see the top again, you'll see there's a colonnade up there as well. And about this gray building on our left, there's about a third way up the facade. You see those windows lifting the cloth out of it. That lines up perfectly with the 55 building across the street. And what that tells you is Kevin Rose had this good out here, but how might my building to fit into the street wall? And to fit in with what's around you? That's a postmodern thing to do. A modernist would have given you a black rectangle you could stick it wherever you wanted to. Highest down to river level here on the left, you can see our river walk. These 6 blocks we're coming into now, completed over the last few years by Carroll Ross Barney Architects. We now have a river walk on the main stem of the river all the way from the lakefront to the fork. Again, about 1.25 miles or 2 kilometers long. Amazingly successful. Lots of fun to hang out on the river walk in these bars and restaurants. Of course, it's early morning and it's mid-October, so it's not very crowded right this moment. But even if it was a July day at this hour, this would already be packed with people. So for now, we're going to see on the left side, ahead of the next block, there's a blue glass Gary Handel apartment building, which is blinding me. Just beyond it, there's a limestone building with 2 wings jutting out and a tower behind it. That behind is from 1930 by Halliburton, that's known as the LaSalle Wacker building. And almost all of our tall buildings in the late 1920s, early 1930s have that exact same shape. And there's a reason for that. In 1923, we passed our first zoning ordinance. It allows us to go taller than we've ever been allowed to go before. The buildings had to get smaller as they got taller to let light filter down to the street. There was literally a math formula you had to follow. And since everyone's following the same math formula, all of our tall buildings necessarily look just like this. Now, if you look at the top of the building, it looks like there's a flagpole up there. That is not a flagpole. That is a navigational feature. The building from 1930, that was the advent of commercial air travel. Airplanes did not have the radar and GPS they have now. They needed help fighting Chicago International Airport, National Midway. So our executive towers had lights on the top to help airplanes orient themselves and figure out how to get to the airport. Obviously, not today. Now, as we come along here, I want you to continue to check out the bridge houses. They are architecture, but I have so many buildings to talk about, I will not focus on them. But as we learn the years and styles, you can start to tell how old our bridges are by the style of architecture that you find on the bridge house. This bridge we're about to go under has neoclassic bridge houses. This bridge dates to the 1920s. But we're going to see Art Deco bridge houses on bridges that dates to the 1930s and 40s, and modern bridge houses on bridges that dates to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. We didn't just build a city and put a bridge in every street. It took us a while to end up with a bridge in every street. Let's continue on the left in the next block. The taller of the two buildings has two silver top towers with two sticks sticking out of the top. That's 225 West Wacker by Combe, Pedersen, and Fox from 1989. And we asked the architects about those two silver top towers, and they told us those are supposed to be Chicago bridge houses. You can look at the bridge house down here. I can look up there. Yeah, I can sort of see that. And they told us that arch number between the two fake bridge houses up there is supposed to be a bridge. I took Chicago bridge houses on the bridge and stuck it up on the top of the front of the building. Why would they do that? Well, they did that to tell us where the building is. Well, we know where the building is because we're cruising on the Chicago River looking at it. But this is an excellent example of the beat you over the head style of architecture, the postmodern. The fake bridge again on this building on our left. And once you find that fake bridge in the building on the left, it's about a quarter of the way down the side, you'll see a silver pot or urn stuck up there. And we asked the architects, well, what's that? And they said Frank Lloyd Wright used that kind of element in his architecture. Frank Lloyd Wright was a Chicago-based architect. This was a building he designed for Chicago, so we're sticking this on the side of the building. It would drive a modernist absolutely crazy with the kind of thing we were doing in postmodern time. And then let's pick one more on the left. That green curved building is also by Combe, Pedersen, and Fox, 333 West Wacker, but a little bit earlier. That's 1983. And people suggest this is the most classic postmodern building in Chicago. Everything about this building makes a reference. The curve is curving from the main stem of the Chicago River, where we are now, down toward the South Branch. We come to the fork of the Chicago River. Notice the skin of the building. Notice how it reflects the buildings around it. What better way as a postmodernist to speak to what's around you, like you want to do, than to reflect it in your skin? Now, if you look around, you see reflective glass everywhere. It's still very... And it's not a coincidence that it's green reflective glass. Green reflective glass reflects what's out in front of the building, this river. And the first thing we'll see when we go out by the river is the first building on the left is the face, and you'll see that stone to reflect the roadway. So we've got road and river out here, stone and green reflective glass up on the side of the building. Eyes down low here on the left, you can see the ramps up to street level. Beyond that, there's a grassy area with some chairs, and beyond it, that's it. The Riverwalk ends, because we're at the fork of the river. Beyond the grassy area, you'll be able to look in a moment to the left down the South Branch of the Chicago River, which looks inviting, and Captain Jordan will take us there, but just not yet. First, he's going to do the right turn and take us up the North Branch of the Chicago River, which is the most recently developed branch of the Chicago River, and thus the most residential. Interesting phenomenon in Chicago over the last 25-30 years, the city has steadily lost population. But within 2 miles of downtown, we've had a population explosion. Thousands and thousands of new residents, primarily young people who want to live in the city, and old people like me whose kids grow up. And the first residential building I want to talk about is directly ahead of it, slightly to our right, the gently curved white building from 2002 by DeStefano, known as the Residences of River Bend. Townhomes in the base, condominiums up above, opaque glass in the parking garage. Moving to the left side of the building, you'll see it's very narrow, because the railroad tracks that go right behind it. Everybody has a door on the far side, balcony on this side. That parking garage has no ramps because the building's so narrow. If you put ramps in a parking garage like that, you have no place for parking spaces. So if you live here, you take the car elevator up to where you park. Now directly ahead of us is a brick building. That's the oldest building I'm going to talk about today, from 1898 by Frank Abbott, now called Fulton House. That was originally known as the North American Cold Storage Facility. It was a warehouse that was a huge freezer. In the mid-1980s, when they decided to convert that brick building into a residential building, it took them 6 months just to thaw the building out. They hauled away 500 semis filled with the insulation material, right? Then they punched holes in the building for the windows and balconies that we see, because of course when it was a freezer, it didn't need windows and balconies. And once they did all that, the structural integrity of the building wasn't what they needed. They were worried about the building to continue to stand up. They solved that problem by jamming steel rods through the building to be able for structural strength. And we can tell where they did that. If you look at the riverside beside, you see what look like starfish stuck up on the outside. Those are just caps on the ends of the steel rods for the engine. So though I told you this is the oldest building I'm going to show you today, it looks absolutely nothing like it looked in 1898. Harry Weiss was the architect that did this conversion to residential, liked the idea of residential up there on the North Branch, so she undertook this project. He designed and now built 4 private residences coming up low-rise on the left, called the River Cottages. As you come up on these buildings, you'll see the side of the buildings in the shape of a big right triangle. Looks a lot like the sail of a sailboat. Harry Weiss was an avid sailor, loved to use it. 4 very vertical private residences here on the left, and that angled ceilings on each floor. Really, Roadway is a neighborhood known as Tiffany Park in 2002 by popular demand. And the Riverwalk. And this is in the Riverwalk I just showed you downtown. That was the city called the Riverwalk on city land. But in 1999, the Chicago City Council passed an ordinance saying any private development anywhere in Chicago along the Chicago River has to have a public Riverwalk. So the developer of these strip rural houses had no choice but to put this walkway in along the river's edge. Then if I take your attention to the right side of it, this from 1979 by Ezra Gordon's East Bank Club. Very fancy help from all the Chicago celebrities work out here. But this is the back of the building. And when it was new, there were almost no windows on the inside because in the 1970s the river was disgusting. Now the river's been cleaned up, the development over there is nice. They put windows on the side of the building. And they took what was essentially their back alley here and tried to spruce it up into a Riverwalk. Underneath the trees and vines, flower boxes along the railing. And then in 2008, they completed this apartment tower at the end called Kingsbury Plaza by Solomon, Cordwell and Bank, a prolific Chicago-based firm, well known for their rounded corners around the ends of their buildings. And we can certainly see that here. As you can imagine, our bridges are metal. Metal and water together do not get along very well together, and so there's a lot of maintenance every summer and into fall, which is what we're hearing here as we're coming up on the Grand Avenue Bridge. So we're about to go under a bridge here that says Ohio Street on the side. It sort of begs the question, why is this bridge so huge, right? You're going under all these really low bridges, why a little fake smokestack has to be so short. So this bridge is massive. But the reason why this bridge is so huge is this is an interstate highway exit ramp. Chicago. It's an incredibly heavily traveled roadway, and that's why the bridge is so huge. That building from 2002 by Lucian LeGrand is known as Erie on the Park. And almost every building I show you today will have those triangles. But usually they're buried in interior walls. The problem with that is that those walls then become structural and cannot be moved. The beauty of Lucian LeGrand's design by putting these triangles to the outer wall, fewer of the interior walls are structural, and therefore the condo owners here, when they renovate, can move walls around. That makes the condos more valuable. That makes everybody very happy. I told you it's called Erie on the Park. The park is this green space you can see down below. This is Aaron Montgomery Ward Park Field. Marshall Field's is a very famous retail store here in Chicago. Now you won't find any Marshall Field stores in Chicago now. They're all called Macy's. But wherever you see a Macy's, that's an old Marshall Field store. Anyway, Montgomery Ward came to Chicago to work for Marshall Field, and he worked as a traveling salesman. Traveled around the rural Midwest and saw the plight of rural people. He ultimately came back to Chicago, quit his job, and started the first mail-order catalog. Okay, that was the ta-da moment of my story. I got no reaction from anyone because nobody really likes a mail-order catalog now. But he was the first guy to think of this. His original catalog was a single page. It grew to be over 1,000 pages long. The business lasted for 129 years. It no longer exists today. The reason I'm telling you so much about Montgomery Ward is about to see all the buildings that comprise the Montgomery Ward complex that is based here in Chicago. And though Montgomery Ward is long gone, I would suggest to you the business is thriving because it's Amazon. Amazon is a catalog business. Now, yeah, sure, I don't use a physical catalog anymore. I use my computer. But it's a catalog business. They're doing nothing. So be wary of the term innovation. First Montgomery Ward building I want to show you is ahead on the right, the white building with the balconies on it. That's from 1930 by Willis McCauley, the old Montgomery Ward administrative offices and warehouse, but now obviously a residential building. This is also an Art Deco building, and many people don't see Art Deco here, and I think it's because our eyes naturally look for limestone. But even back in the 1930s, limestone was pretty expensive, because most Art Deco buildings are limestone. So you got to look harder to find the Art Deco. Well, what makes a building Art Deco? We talked about it with that first Art Deco building I showed you. And it's easiest to see down low here between the first and second floor, those brown decorations look like dragonflies, palm fronds. That's Art Deco. And look at the Riverwalk punched out of the first floor of the building. The warehouse came right up to the river's edge. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will not let you build out in the Chicago River. First floor. Now, that's not as pretty as some of the Riverwalk we've seen. It sure is nice when you're out walking your dog or going for a run or something. Continue along this block. And then ahead on the right, the next block is a massive structure curving in front of us. That was the main Montgomery Ward warehouse back in the day. It's a building now known as 600 West. That's the street number. And it's built in stages. That first corner over there with the Echo sign on it was completed in 1908. The part directly ahead of it is on an angle that looks the same was completed in 1917, and there's a part in the far end of the building that's a little bit taller and looks different. That was completed in the mid-1940s. But this part here on the right with the horizontal brickwork was done by the firm Schmidt and Garten. It was a partnership, and these guys were friends and contemporaries of Frank Lloyd Wright, and they tended to mimic Frank Lloyd Wright's style. And we're not going to see any Frank Lloyd Wright today. Though he was a Chicago-based architect, he didn't do anything along the Chicago River. But this is the most prairie style, Frank Lloyd Wright style building we're going to see. And the prairie style emphasized Biltmore's Island. You can see that in the brickwork above. And if you're familiar with Frank Lloyd Wright's work, these decorations you see between the second and third floor, reminiscent of the kind of thing you might see him do. Again, warehouse right up to the river's edge, so when they converted the part with the horizontal brickwork into corporate offices, they had to punch out the first floor to get a river walk. The part at the far that's a little taller and looks different, that is a residential building known as Domain. Well, you can feel Captain Jordan turning this here. This is as far up the north branch as we're going to go. And as we turn here, this is when that hand might come in handy if you don't have a hat, perhaps the broad. There was a building moving up with big white corners, and that building with big white corners is 1974 by Minoru Yamasaki. That was the Montgomery Ward Administrative Offices back in the day, but now it's a residential building known as the Montgomery. Those big white corners are where all the structure of the building is, leaving wide open flexible office space back in the day, now wide open flexible residential space. Minoru Yamasaki, the architect of that building, the same architect that designed the Twin Towers that fell on September 11, 2001 in New York City. Now for all you astute observers, you might have noticed I say pretty much on the right, coming up the north branch, and you peeked over to the left and you saw why. This is a huge construction project. So now as we turn, that construction project's on the right, you can see all the cranes there. That is a 20-acre development. That is a huge development site, this close to a major city's downtown. It used to be a huge factory here that printed newspapers. They tore it down. Now there's going to be multiple residential towers, an office tower, a theater, a brand new park, a beautiful new riverwalk. But the anchor of this whole project is our first permanent casino in Chicago. And they told us the casino is going to open in 2026. I am not a betting man, but I'll bet you there's no open casino here in 2026. But never fear, we have a temporary casino in the River North neighborhood of Chicago, and it will stay open until the permanent casino opens. So your gambling needs can be currently met in the city. So as we head back down toward the fork of the river, I've talked about everything on the left side I want to talk about. There isn't a lot to talk about on the right, because the construction project is sort of cool, but I don't have much to say about it. So this is a good opportunity for me to talk about the physical river itself. And the reason why I'm telling you this, you're sitting there with no drink in your hand, and you're thinking to yourself, I really should see Mary Jo, because it's got to be getting close to noon, and I'm obviously on vacation, I'm on a boat, why do I not have a drink in my hand? But I don't want to miss anything. This is a great time to run down and see it, because in the next 3 or 4 minutes, I'm just going to be talking about the river, and I'm not going to point out anything. And you'll be back up here with your drink before I start pointing out things again. And also don't forget that thing about the restaurant being locked up toward the end of the tour. Not a bad time to take care of that as well. As I told you at the beginning of the cruise, this river was our industrial port. All the industrial buildings on either side were dumped their industrial waste into the water. And that was not unique to Chicago. That's what we did in the 19th century. We dumped industrial waste into natural bodies of water. The problem in Chicago was we had a lot of industrial waste and not that big of a body of water. Furthermore, in the 19th century in Chicago, we had a really lousy sewer system. If it rained really at all, raw sewage ran off into our river. And if you know anything about Chicago's history, you might be aware that back in the 19th century, just south of downtown, there's a huge area of meatpacking plants called the Union Stockyards. Tens of thousands of animals delivered every day to be slaughtered, meat packaged up, put on refrigerated boxcars, sent out all over the country. Many of those animals were dead on arrival from disease. And some of the meatpacking plants just south of downtown were along the south branch of the Chicago River. And they would dispose of those diseased, dead carcasses by throwing them into the south branch of the Chicago River. The joke on the south branch is that you could literally walk across the river because there were so many dead animals floating in it. I've seen photographs, it was disgusting. So we had a toxic mess. We had industrial waste, we had human waste, we had diseased dead animals floating in our water. And it's always a problem when you poison a natural body of water. But it's a particular problem here in Chicago because the Chicago River flowed into Lake Michigan. And to this day, Lake Michigan's where we get our drinking water. We were poisoning our own water supply. And we knew it, we just didn't know what to do about it. We thrashed around for a long time, there were cholera outbreaks, it was bad. Finally, in 1889, the Chicago Sanitary Commission was formed. And these poor guys put on this commission were charged with cleaning up the water supply. It was a huge ask. What could they do? They thought of two things. The first thing they thought of was that canal I mentioned at the very beginning of the cruise. We thought, gee, wouldn't it be great if we get this toxic mess in our river flow into that canal and off to the southwest rather than out into Lake Michigan? Well, that sounds great, but there weren't pumps or anything that could do that, so they had to think of something else. Second thing they thought of, something we all know about water, and that is that water will always seek out the lowest point. So they thought, gee, well, instead of using this canal we already have, what if we build a second parallel canal? Well, the difference with this new canal is it's going to be really deep and get deeper and deeper and deeper as it goes off to the southwest. And that's what they decided to do. They built a wall on the Chicago River end, a wall on the Des Plaines River end, and they started digging a really deep trench. And I mean really deep. This was a larger dig than the Panama Canal. It is still considered one of the largest earthmoving projects ever in world history. Well, our friends in St. Louis, which is the city right in the center of the country, got wind of what we were doing, and they realized, hey, wait a minute. If this works, and Chicago's toxic waste goes off to the southwest of this canal, it's going to join the Mississippi River right where we are. And we do not want Chicago's toxic waste. So what did we do in Chicago? We hurried up really fast and actually opened the gates before we were done, January 1900, and it worked. So we opened those gates. The canals are down on the south branch. We opened the trench, and the south branch of the Chicago River starts pouring into the really deep trench that it's now attached to, and it trickled off to the southwest. That's why I left a void in the south branch. So the north branch we're traveling on right now, which is always flowing into the main stem of the Chicago River, started flowing into the south branch to fill the void. Then the main stem of the river, which we had started our cruise on, is always flowing into Lake Michigan, starts back flowing into the south branch to fill the void, and then Lake Michigan started flowing into the main stem of the Chicago River. We successfully reversed the flow of the Chicago River, and to this day, the Chicago River flows the opposite direction of the way it originally flowed. You might say, well, what about those lawsuits from our friends in St. Louis? Well, it turns out as rivers flow, they have a way of cleaning themselves, primarily through dilution. But the water was not toxic by the time it got to St. Louis, so those lawsuits were ultimately settled in our favor, were dropped. But now we had another problem. I don't know how much you know about the Great Lakes, but 22% of the world's fresh water is in the Great Lakes. That's a big deal. And we take that really seriously here in Chicago, as do the other states around the Great Lakes who sued the city of Chicago for us sucking Lake Michigan down the Chicago River. We settled those lawsuits by building the Chicago Lock between the lake and the river. We'll see the lock later in the cruise. The lake's a number of feet higher than the river, and that varies based upon the amount of rain we get in the summertime and the amount of ice coverage in the winter. The more ice coverage in the winter, the less the lake evaporates, the higher the lake level is the following year. We take a little bit of the lake every day for the lock operation, but just a little bit. It's part of the reason why our river flows so smoothly. What about the river today? It's still considered polluted as the most urban waterways, but it's not a toxic mess. You'll see people out here jet skiing, paddleboarding, kayaking, get water all over yourself, you're fine. This bridge we're about to go into, the Kinsey Street Bridge, different than most Mediterranean bascule bridges we've gone under. No crack in the middle. This is what's called a single leaf bridge. It just pivots on the left side, just like the bridge behind it that's in the up position. That's the Kinsey Railroad Bridge from 1908, and that bridge is always up because it's an unused railroad right of way. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute, if that's an unused bridge, why don't we just tear it down? Well, the reason we don't tear that railroad right of way bridge down, you'll see when we go under it. Because as we go under it, if you look to the left, you'll see this unused right of way goes through this building to the left, it actually goes through more buildings to the left. And that's what they're saying. Maybe for an express bus line, a TTA rail line, some of these people further east in the city as it gets more and more congested. And it's really expensive to build a new bridge. Much cheaper just to keep this one here, maintain it, and have it ready when we need it. Not to mention, now we talked about this gently curved white building on the right and the railroad tracks that go right behind it. Well, those railroad tracks go ahead, and underneath the blue reflective glass building ahead on the right, that's called River Point by Picard Chilton, the corporate office tower from 2017. That blue reflective glass building is built on a big concrete deck. It's actually a tunnel for the trains to go through. As we come up on that concrete tunnel, you're going to see a river level walk down below, a part up on top of the tunnel. And when it comes to your view, you'll see there are big round, what look like porthole windows on the side. They are not. And then to the left of River Point, and directly ahead of us, is another blue reflective glass building. That's 150 North Riverside by Debt Partners, also 2017, also a corporate office tower. Now this building, I want to focus on the base, how it tapers into that gray rectangular center. They cannot get the right side of this building down to the ground. So if they get that right side of that building down to the ground, they block the railroad tracks that are coming out of this tunnel on our right. So that different colored glass you see on the bottom right, that is the corporate office lobby, but it is suspended in the air over the railroad tracks. And then the left side of this building, they cannot take that down to the ground because they leave space for that mandated public river walk. So they channeled the weight of this entire structure into that gray rectangular center, a feat of structural engineering. But the problem with this design is we're looking at the north facade. The building is oriented north to south. And our prevailing winds are from the west-southwest. And when winds hit a building, it sways. It should sway. The structural engineer does not want a building to be too rigid. But there's a problem if it sways too much. And the problem is not that the building's going to fall down. A structural engineer has no problem keeping a building like this up in the air. The problem of a building like this sways too much, people sitting at their desks up near the top will get seasick while they're just sitting there. That's a problem if you're trying to lease commercial office space. So they solved that problem here, and the way they solved that problem here is there's a floor of roofs up near the top called tuned dampers, and they are rooms almost filled with water, like swimming pools. And what happens is when the wind hits this building and the building starts moving one direction, the water in those rooms flies in the opposite direction, and that reduces the sway of the top of the building. My favorite thing about this building is our reflection. If you're wearing something colorful, you can look up there and find yourself. Oh, and hello to you down in the bow. I can now see you. So the Getch partners do this building on our right. They also do the building ahead on the left in the next block. That's called Bank of America Tower from 2020. Notice the riverside facade, how it stair steps away from us. Think about how many corner offices there are on every floor of that building. Extremely popular with tenants. This is a fairly narrow lot. The developers wanted a building that came all the way out to the river's edge, but of course they knew they needed to leave space for that mandated public river walk. So they took a page out of those older buildings books that we saw where they punched out the first floor. Nothing to punch out here, the building's brand new, but they basically built their building all the way out to the river's edge except left out the bottom. So if we look to the left, as we come out by the bridge, the river walks up behind these silver tridents. If you look above the riverwalk, you see that white ceiling. Imagine if they pushed this whole building back that far. How many square feet they would have lost all the way to the top of the building. So a very smart design. They got the riverwalk, but they got as many square feet as they possibly could onto this lot. And then ahead on the left in the next block, there's a limestone building from 1929 by Graham Anderson Brooks and White. That's the Opera House. I'd like to tell you this building is Art Deco. 1929 is the height of Art Deco. But as we get closer, we're going to see neoclassic decoration, triangular pediments over the lower windows, wreaths and garlands, tragic and comic faces. And people ask Graham Anderson Brooks and White, what are you doing? This is kind of this new modern style. And they said opera is a classic form of performance art, and therefore the building demands neoclassic decoration. You have to be careful with the years and styles. It usually works, but not always. This building isn't really Art Deco. Come out by the bridge here on the left, there's a big stone wall inside the building. That's where the Opera House is on the other side, second largest opera house in the United States after the one in Lincoln Center in New York City. And you can the size of this big stone wall in your mind as you look ahead on the left into the next block. The maroon building with a low-rise part in the center. The low-rise part in the center ahead used to have no windows. It was a big stone wall. It was a postmodern reference to the Opera House. These two stone walls were almost exactly the same size. The building ahead from the mid-'80s by Fujikawa Johnson is the Chicago Mercantile Exchange building, and behind the big stone wall ahead is where the Mercantile Exchange trading floor was. Well, when the Mercantile Exchange merged with the Chicago Board of Trade, they moved their combined trading floor over to LaSalle Street, the heart of our financial district, and they filled that old trading floor space with floors of offices. And then people had an office with a stone panel between them and the water, and they're like, no, I want a window here. And so they gradually took those stone panels out of this low central section and replaced it with windows. So as we come out by the bridge, if you look up into those windows, in that low central section, look through them, you'll actually see the structure of the building behind the windows. It's a little hard with the reflection, but you can see it. And this is weird because architects don't do this, but then the architects never expected there to be windows in that low central section. Take your attention to the right side of the boat. Don't crane your neck for that building. Its exact twin is on the right in the next block from 1965 and 1968, both by Skidmore and Camaro. Next to us is Gateway Center number 1, and ahead is Gateway Center number 2. We talked about this before, right? That's remodeling is black painted steel and glass rectangles, no applied decoration. Still hard to see the structure. We'll see that here in just a minute around another building. But buildings like these black rectangles were built in every major city in the world in the middle of the 20th century. Now, international style can mean a lot of things depending on what you're talking about. But if you're talking about commercial architecture and you say international style, you're talking about what we're looking at here off the right side of the boat. Gateway Center number 3, now called Fifth Third Center, but it's just like the two black buildings we passed on the right, and we've swapped out that black painted steel here and replaced it with white painted concrete, but it's still a modernist building. My favorite thing about that white building on the right was the bustle on the side of the building. A bustle is a smaller side building attached to a larger building. We'll find the bustle on this white building on the right at the far end as we come out by the bridge. It's a low-rise black cube. And when that low-rise black cube comes into your view, you will see there are big black X's on the outside. And we know what these X's are. That structure over the outside of the building. This is a previous version of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange trading floor. And when I'm talking about trading floor, I'm talking about open outcry trading, where people need the hand signals to buy and sell things. You couldn't have commas coming down to the middle of the room blocking view. So the beauty of this structure is there was no internal structure. All the structure was on the outside of the building. It was a huge empty cube. Now the Mercantile Exchange was out of here years and years ago. It's now at home front with the floors of the building. And then on the right, the next block, Gateway Center number 4, also Skidmore and Zamero, but now 1983. So there's that green reflective glass again to reflect the color of the river and the buildings around it. For the bridge, we're going to stay on the right, beyond the green reflective glass building. In the next 2 blocks, you can see a massive structure. 1921 Central Building with a 1934 wraparound Art Deco addition, all by Graham Anderson Brooks and White. That is the old U.S. Central Post Office. And that building was empty for 23 years after the post office moved out. It was so huge, they didn't know what to do with it. They finally decided to convert it into a huge office park. It's a massive structure, huge green roof on the top. But the real gem of this building is the corporate office lobby. It's the old front of the house post office space. Beautiful marble Art Deco space. The Architecture Center gives 60-minute building tours of this building where you get inside, see a lot of spaces the public can't see. We give a lot of different building tours in the city, not every day, but you can check out our website, architecture.org, find out what building tours are happening while you're here. If it doesn't work this trip, maybe next trip to Chicago. But it's really fun to get inside some of these buildings and see a lot of the beautiful design and architecture on the inside as well as the outside from the city. Now, if you come out by this bridge, you look ahead, you see there's another bridge roadway, and it looks like this roadway is shooting to the right to the post office, and that's because that road, when they built the original post office building, they left a hole in the bottom of the building for a roadway that did not exist. Because they planned a huge civic center to the west. That was never built. So when the interstate highway system came along and we needed a place to shoot our interstate highway out to the western suburbs, we had it right to the post office. So this is an interstate highway bridge we're about to go under. It's extremely low and it's unpredictable, but it can be very noisy. So I'm going to pause my commentary as we go under. I'll pick up my commentary on the other side. To the left at Grand Central Station, a huge train station torn down in the early 1970s. Beyond that, on the left, you see a bunch of older buildings over there. They would have been empty in the 1970s. Now they're almost all residential. And where you see the shinier towers off to the left, those would have just been empty lots in the 1970s. In the 1970s, this entire area to our left was an absolute wasteland. There was nothing here, just south of downtown. Now those older buildings back there I told you are residential. That's a wonderful urban neighborhood known as the Printers Row Historic District neighborhood. Great book fair there in early September. If you ever happen to be here when the Printers Row Book Fest is happening, you want to check that out. And this land on the left as we come out by the bridge has been empty since the 1970s as well. This is where all those railroad tracks went into that train station. Now a development called South Bank by Perkins and Mill, about 1,700 new residences going in here. You can see they've already built in the Riverwalk here on these stilts on the side, slanting down. Two of the four buildings are completed. The first one completed is the one set back of it with the angle facade. That's the Cooper at South Bank from 2017. And to the right of it, there's a black building a little bit taller. That's the Reed at South Bank from 2022. Those are both luxury apartment towers. Because there's two more towers coming here on the left. But you'll notice the riverwalk slants down behind these trees on the left, and then in a moment it's going to zigzag up to a terrace. And in a moment, we're going to see big stone stairs stepping down that terrace. And the Architecture Center asked the developer what of these big stones they're about to see, and they told us it was the train station foundation. When they started digging the foundations for all these buildings, they found there was stonework underground, and they cut out the stones, and they drug it over here, stair-stepped it up. To recycle it, they said, but it wasn't all benevolence because it's extremely expensive to dispose of stones the size that we see here on the left. It does look pretty, but they save themselves a fortune by doing this. Nice close-up of the Reed at South Bank. And then beyond the Reed at South Bank, there's a curved concrete building. That curved concrete building is from 1986 by Bertrand Goldberg. It's called River City. Sort of begs the question, what style of architecture is that? And I'll tell you, we call it modernism. You might say, wait a minute, that looks nothing like that international style we talked about a moment ago. And I say, no, but yes, I mean, it's similar that it's colorless. Instead of black painted steel, it's just raw concrete. But there's no applied decoration inside. The big difference with this building, of course, is its curve. And Bertrand Goldberg suggested there are no right angles in nature, and he wanted his buildings to feel natural. And we can have an argument about whether this building feels natural or not. But that was his thought process, and it's important to know an architect's thoughts. This style is sometimes referred to as brutalism, not because it's brutal to look at, but because of the term béton brut, which means raw concrete in French. Or brutalism, which is a subset of modernism. And if you look at this part that's jutting out here on the left, you look down low, you see there's a marina underneath the building, but more importantly, look at all the columns. We can look at this building on the left, we can understand how it stands up. That is the goal of the modernists. Now on the right side there's an ugly electrical building, you don't want to talk about it, but as soon as we clear it, there's a little radio antenna tower close to us, and about 4 blocks off to the right, a much taller radio antenna tower. Where that taller radio antenna tower is where the Chicago Fire Training Academy is. Where we trained Chicago firefighters here in the city, and ironically, that's where Mrs. O'Leary's barn was in 1871, where the Great Chicago Fire started. 1871, about a hot, dry summer. Early October, it was a strong wind out of the southwest. Southwest, facing directly to right off the road as Captain George starting to turn us again. Fire catches at Mrs. O'Leary's barn, sneaks quickly over here to the river's edge on the back of that southwest wind. Wood embers flying up in the air, fly across the river, land where River City is, catch the buildings there on fire. Continues burning up to the north-northeast, basically back up to our dock where it jumps the river again, and continues burning up to the north-northeast. Burns out at about North or Fullerton Avenues, and you know the geography of Chicago, it basically burns out where the Lincoln Park Zoo begins now, where the city ended in 1871. About a third of our population left homeless, about 100,000 people. Only, and I say only about 300 people perished. That's not that many for that kind of destruction. Fire burned for a day and a half, but most people were able to outwalk the fire. But there were some silver linings to the fire. got Jordan's turning us around here partially because there's not a lot of buildings to see as we go further south because it's fairly industrial down there. In the 19th century, that's where the Union stockyards were, behind us, down the South Ramp. Most of the jobs in Chicago. In the 19th century, when the city would burn, this was very common. Cities burned all the time in the 19th century. Many cities did not survive their fires because people scattered across the country looking for work. But again, in Chicago, most of the jobs were in the stockyards. So yeah, that southwest wind blew through downtown, but it spared the stockyards. And so people lost their home, but they still had their job. There was no reason to run across the country looking for work. People simply rebuilt and stayed. That was important to our survival. The other good thing about that southwest wind, sure, it blew through downtown and obliterated everything, but what it did is it wiped the slate clean. It gave us a chance to start over with many elements. It's a nice view of River City here on the right, lead to South Bank. I want to talk about the two buildings beyond that, the pink building with the black building behind it and the white antennas. We're going to start with the black building with the white antennas. But before we talk about that black building with the white antennas, I'm going to point out the barge coming by. I've been watching it all the way down the North Branch. It's been following us the whole time. But there is still industry on the river, and I've learned from experience it's really hard for me to compete with a barge that's going by, so we're going to stop and look at this barge as it goes by. It's actually nice that it's passing us here. This part of the river is fairly wide. Other places it gets very difficult for Captain Jordan to maneuver the boat to get out of the way. These guys have the right of way. So let's talk about that black building with the white antennas. That's now called Willis Tower. It's called Sears Tower for a good chunk of its life. It's completed in 1974, designed by Bruce Graham. Fosler Khan, K-H-A-N, the structural engineer. The reason why I'm telling you about the structural engineer on Willis Tower is it's built differently than most of the buildings we've seen and we'll see. Most of the buildings we've seen and we'll see are skeletal structures. We talked about the very first building I showed you, the River building, we talked about it having a steel skeletal structure. Well, a lot of these newer buildings I've shown you have concrete skeletal structures. The Willis is built using something called bundled tube technology. The best way to describe bundled tube technology is this: to imagine a roll of paper towels. To finish the roll of paper towels, you have that cardboard tube. Take that cardboard tube off the holder and you stand it up on its end on a countertop and blow at it, it's going to fall right over. But if you ignite those cardboard tubes, the rubber band and the other end stands on the countertop and blow at it, it's not going to fall over because they're going to support each other. And furthermore, if you cut up the tops of some of those tubes and blow at it, it's not even going to scoot across the counter. And your breast's going to go right around it. That's essentially the technology of Willis Tower. Only instead of 9 round cardboard tubes, there's 9 much larger square steel tubes banded together. And all 9 tubes go up the first 50 floors where 2 tubes stop. 2 more stop at the 66th floor. 3 stop at the 90th floor. Only 2 tubes go to the full 110-story height. The central tube and the western tube. It is 442 meters from the sidewalk to the top of the black part of the building, or 1,451 feet. The white antennas don't count in the height. How do I know that? Well, the Council of Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat tells me so. There's a group, they're actually based in Chicago, that says what is and is not part of the building about the measure in front. So there was a controversy in this country a few years ago when the One World Trade was being completed in New York City. Was it going to be taller, or was Willis going to be taller? The building in New York, designed by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, by the way. But you might say, wait a minute, how could there be a controversy? We have measuring tapes, this should not be that difficult. Well, let me explain. The building in New York is very tall, and on top of it is a really tall stick, which they call a spire. But if you break that stick off the top of the building in New York City, and you can pick up the building in New York and set it next to Willis Tower, it is shorter than the black part of Willis Tower. That stick in New York is just that. It's a stick, it's a decoration, and therefore part of the building. Those white antennas, functioning antennas, not part of the building. Willis is the second tallest building. Just in front of Willis Tower is a pink building. That's 311 South Blacker by Cohn Pedersen and Fox. When they got the permission to build that pink building, they were building next to it was then the tallest building in the world. Willis is now number 26 on the tallest building in the world is. But they wanted the building to stand out, so they clad it in Texas pink granite to contrast with the blackness of Willis Tower. They made the building in regular shape to contrast with the rectilinearity of Willis Tower. And they crowned the whole thing with a wedding cake, and that wedding cake on top shines fluorescent light at night. It is so bright they have to dim it during migratory bird season, which confuses the birds. But they achieved their goal, because when you're driving it from the suburbs at night, you don't notice the dark Willis Tower standing there. Here's that bright wedding cake shining on top of 311 South Black. We pause again here as we go into the highway bridge. You really see the bundled tubes here. And to the very top of the building, on the left side facade in the shade, you might be able to see those clear boxes sticking out. That's called the ledge. You can pay money to step into those boxes between your feet all the way to the sidewalk. Why you'd want to do that, I have no idea, but just so you know that option exists for you. And to the left of Willis Tower and ahead of us on the right is another modernist building, more of a copper color than black. That's 300 South Blacker by A.M. and Sons from the early 1970s. 1970? Of course, we're going to be looking at the back of the building, right? Nobody was oriented the river in the 1970s. Well, the owners of this building now know there's so many people like us cruising by the back of the building, they wanted to do something to speak to us. So they did their elevator shaft, which is the stone part in the center of the back of the building, and they painted a mural on it. And it's a mural in the South Branch of the Chicago River. As we go under, if you look up at the top, you might be able to make out the fork of the river, the white-shaped fork at the top, and then coming down to the south branch, and that orange thing sticking out is a "You're Here" marker for that building on the map they painted. Just something to speak to us as we're cruising by the back of the building. Let's stay on the right, ahead in the next block. The taller the building has a triangular cutout. That's 200 South Backer from 1981 by Harry Weiss. The owner of that lot wanted a building that covered the entire area of the lot, and that was a challenge because the lot was not in the shape of a square or a rectangle. It was a river here. So we hired Harry Weiss, our triangle guy we talked about up in the North Ramp, to do this two triangle method. The triangle on the right that is shorter is much smaller in area than the triangle on the left that is taller. So if you hover over this building and look down on it, it's not the shape of a rectangle, but it covers the entire area of the lot. So I told you 1981 for this building, that's the very tail end of modernism, so the base is shoved back so we can see the support columns like a modernist wants to show us. Then Harry Weiss took those support columns and turned them into a diamond shape. What that does is emphasize a triangle to us out here along the river and a triangle to the folks along the street. The man is obsessed with triangles, and we're not done with him yet. Now take your attention back to the left side of the boat. Now we talked about the Gateway Center buildings coming down the south branch, but you no doubt noticed all these railroad tracks underneath. These buildings were built using air rights, meaning they did not buy the land. The railroad still owns the land. The buildings bought the air over the land. And now, there used to be freight and passenger rail back in the day here, but now just passenger rail. Amtrak, the U.S. National Passenger Rail Service, used to be tracks, as does Metra commuter rail. You see the CTA elevated trains around town. They used to service Chicago and the near surrounding suburbs. These regional commuter trains you'll see underground here, these double-decker silver cars that say Metro on the side, they go way out in the suburbs. I would argue they go out to the countryside. You can go really far outside the city of Chicago and commute in on these regional commuter trains. Now take your attention upriver on the left, about 3 blocks, you'll see a brick warehouse sort of tucked back in with a clock face on it. That from 1913 by D.H. Burnham and Company. There's now corporate offices. But that warehouse was built on the river when it was built, but it was just set back because there were railroad tracks between it and the water. Now as we hit the water is a gray silver tower built over the railroad tracks called the Boeing Building in the early 90s. Now we come out front of this next bridge. I want to focus on that Boeing building, but again I want to focus on the bustle. In this case, that smaller side there. In this case, the bustle is jutting out toward us with a skeletal roof structure. So now we're looking ahead 2 blocks on the left, gray silver building with a silver skeletal roof structure. And that is actually structured, because where that bustle was built, the railroad tracks underneath curved. And when railroad tracks curved, you need more clearance on either side of the track for the railroad cars, and they could not get the southwest corner of that bustle building down to the ground. The southwest corner being the corner closest to us and to the left. So that bustle is like a 3-legged table. About a quarter of the way the building is actually being held up in the air by that skeletal roof structure. Another feat of structural engineering. A little bit closer to us on the left, this limestone building from 1929 by Halliburton Root is the old Chicago Daily News building, a very famous newspaper here in Chicago that no longer exists. So it's very common in Art Deco architecture to find these ancient Egyptian and Middle Eastern reference carved into the side of the building, and it really makes no sense without taking into account that time period. Come out front of the Washington Boulevard Bridge. I want to focus our attention up to the street level, and there's 4 flags flying up there. They're not blowing around too much because it's not very windy right now. But I want to talk about the 3rd flag. You can probably see it better elsewhere in the city. But let's talk about that 3rd flag. It's a white flag. You can do a bunch of them. 2 horizontal lightly stripes and 4 red stars. That's the city of Chicago flag. 2 horizontal lightly stripes represent the 2 bodies of water in Chicago, the river and the lake, leaving 3 white sections for the 3 sides of Chicago. North, west, and south. There is only an east side. That's where that big lake is. And there are 4 red stars on there now, but originally there were just 2. And we talked about what the first 2 red stars on the flag represented by the founding of Fort Dearborn in 1803, the Great Chicago Fire 1871. So in 1933 we added 2 more stars to our flag, representing the 2 World's Fairs in Chicago, the 1893 World's Columbia Exposition and the 1933 Century of Progress Fair. World's Fairs were a really big deal in the late 19th and early 20th century. You've got to remember, this is before the internet, television, radio, or commercial air travel. Information and people could not travel like they can now, even if you're rich. And so the way you learned about the world, you hosted a World's Fair. People came from all over the world to live here for 8 months, and we went to the World's Fair to see how they live, to learn about their culture, their food, their music, their language, their dress, because we had no realistic possibility of traveling the world. Obviously, World's Fair is not such a big deal anymore. Back underneath this bridge, we'll be back to the portrait of Chicago River. I want to focus on those 3 glass buildings you see directly out side. They're built on a very famous spit of land that juts out into the Fort River River called Wolf Point. And in the early days of Chicago in the 1840s, most of our population lived directly ahead of the road on Wolf Point. I've been in Chicago for nearly 40 years. And until just the last couple of years, Wolf Point was a surface parking lot. So what an improvement. We've got these beautiful buildings and this lovely river walk that haven't left versus just looking at parked cars. Captain Jordan's going to turn us back up the main stem of the Chicago River. He's actually going to take us beyond where we started. And obviously, I'm going to talk about different things going this way. And we're going to start with that big limestone building directly ahead of us. That's from 1930 by Great Anderson Preston White. It's known as the Mart. It was built to be the Marshall Field's wholesale store. In the late 19th, early 20th century, every small town in America had a mom-and-pop department store. But those mom-and-pop department stores bought their goods from a major retailer in a big city like Marshall Field's here in Chicago that had a wholesale division. And we talked earlier about the fact that Marshall Field's is long gone, but this building is still about half filled with wholesale furniture companies. The other half is filled with tech companies. We've got a lot of tech companies started in Chicago, primarily in the suburbs where rents were cheap. But most people working in those tech companies are young. Most young people live in the city, so they were reverse commuting out to their tech companies. Our reverse commute is even worse than our regular commute. So as young people were demanding that their firms move downtown, so with the smart rewired for 21st century technology, a lot of tech companies moved in. The tech companies, probably the most famous name you know being Motorola, they're headquartered in there. This is a massive structure. There's not quite as many, there's almost as many square feet in this building as there is in Willis Tower. Only Willis Tower is all about the vertical, this is all about the horizontal. Beautiful Art Deco building. Top part of the bridge, I'm going to stay on the left side ahead. The next block, you'll see a brick building. It says Chicago School on the side. Just behind it, a colored glass building. The colored glass building is 300 books for sale by Chicago 2007. And it's LEED certified. L-E-E-D stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. It's a green building stamp for approval by the U.S. Green Building Council. There's a lot of different factors in the way you get this approval. There's different levels of approval you get. And we've seen a lot of LEED certified buildings already today. When I say talking about this building, I want to tell you my favorite thing that this building does. They take millions of gallons of water out of the Chicago River every year, and they use it in their cooling system. By doing that, they're saving millions of gallons of drinkable water. Because they won't be using river water, they'd be using tap water. And then before they put that water back into the Chicago River, which by law they must do, they're filtering it. That they don't have to do. So they're actively helping clean the Chicago River. And then staying on the left ahead, the next block, the brick building, the old Reed Murdoch building from 1914 by George Nimitz. There's now corporate offices. If you look above the clock base there, you can see it says Whirlpool facing toward us, Britannica facing out toward the river. Now I can see it says about 5 after 11, so that means there's about 10 minutes left on the napkins, and I promise not to bring